My name is Brad Horton. I've been with VP for 23 years, and before I was with VP, I built racing engines. That's what I did for a living. And so part of my job at VP is not only regional sales area, but I also do a lot of tech stuff. I travel around the country and do these little tech seminars like this, and I've done them with PRI and some of the other big trade shows and all that. Do some dyno work with people, things of that nature. And it's truly amazing when racers call me up or talking to me or whatever, you know, they're liable to know, you know, I can ask them something about their motor. Oh yeah, man, that camshaft's running on 110 center line, you know, it's a 600 lift. They know everything there is to know about it. They know everything there is to know about their pistons, about their valves, valve springs, all that. And then what do? Whenever they go down to get some fuel, they just get the cheapest racing fuel they can put in it, right? Racing fuel should be considered a performance part, just like your oil, okay? And it's very misunderstood, you know, non-oxygenated versus oxygenated. You know, why is some methanol only $95 a drum and our stuff is, you know, $200 a drum? You know, there's a lot of questions like that. And especially in a dirt track world, the dirt track guys typically don't pick the phone up and call and ask the questions. They do the same thing over and over. They go to the racetrack, they take their jug up to the fuel vendor, they set it down, and they go 110. And by doing that, especially at a track where there's no fuel rules, you guys are leaving horsepower on the table. That's what you're doing. You're hurting yourself. Yeah, it's saving you a little bit of money, but, you know, so what? You know, what else are you going to do to get 15 extra horsepower? You know, I mean, so do you guys understand octane numbers? Do you understand them?
A little bit more octane the better, right?
No.
Not necessarily.
No, not. And do you know how they get octane numbers? If you don't, I will go through it for you right quick. Do you have a whiteboard or anything? Or? Okay.
We got one hanging in the club.
We could go take one out, that one real quick.
If you would, it'd be helpful because I can draw it out for you guys. If you got time, if you want to see it. If you don't want to see it, just tell me and we'll go on.
I would love to see it.
Okay. Because it's interesting.
Isn't there a machine that I think compresses it, it burns it, and then depending on the compress or the burning of it, they determine the number. I remember something about that, but there's a machine that goes. I think the highest is 120 for fuel, and then for airplanes, I think it goes up to 200.
Goes up to 160. That's a supercharger
160.
number. Yeah. That's called F4 supercharger number. Yeah. There's F3, which is lean knock motor, and then there's F4, which is supercharger rich knock. We've been making the fuels for the Reno Air Racers for the last probably the 28 years, 30 years, something like that. We make a fuel for the guys who run the hot rod P51s and stuff out there. It's called Air Race. And it always comes back from the lab on the lean knock around a 128. On the rich knock, it always comes back with a greater than symbol, 160. So it's as high as their machine goes. And that's what those guys use in those old Rolls-Royce P51 supercharged engines out there. Those things were designed to run at about 65 inches of manifold pressure maximum. Okay? Well, they've changed the gearing up in the back of those things. They got a big blower on the back of them. Back of that engine. It's a V12 1600 something cubic inch motor, and the carburetor's on the back, goes into centrifugal blower. It's blown up across the top of the intake down into the cylinders, and they speed that blower drive up to where they bump the manifold pressure from 65 inches. Some of them are running about 135, 138 inches of manifold pressure.
Wow.
Now, and that's all old World War II technology.
You couldn't break those things with a 50 cal for it.
Oh no, they're actually pretty fragile engines. Sure are. They tear them up all the time out there. I seen Miss America one time, May Day in the air, and whenever he May Day, he crash landed, basically tore it up pretty good. And they pulled the motor out of it, and you could see through the block, the
Oh.
side, completely through the side of the
Oh,
block.
gosh.
This thing. I got a picture of it somewhere. I don't remember where it's at. You know, that's something else that I do. I'm a flight instructor also, so I do flight instruction.
That's awesome.
Okay.
All right, good
How
deal.
about that?
Perfect, perfect.
Okay, put that on your list, we'll get this room, more board in here.
All right. There's two different machines, guys. There's a motor machine, motor octane number, okay, then there's an RON. That's a research octane number. RPM, intake air temp, and then timing. Okay, the motor machine is ran at 900 RPM. The research machine is ran at 600 RPM. The intake air temperature of the motor machine is heated. It's got a heater inside the intake runner, and they'll heat that charge up. They heat it up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? On the RON, it's kept, I think it's at 120, I believe is what it's kept at, Fahrenheit. And on the timing, the motor machine is ran at 26 degrees, whereas the research is at 13 degrees, okay? So these are two separate machines. These things are old dinosaur machines that are built back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and they don't make them new anymore or anything like that. And they got one big cylinder on them. They got two belts that run back to an electric motor. The electric motor holds them at a certain RPM, keeps them from running out of control. And they just chug along, dum, 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 you know. And they got a big crank on the side of them where you can raise and lower the cylinder head to increase or lower the compression. And let me tell you what, when you start cranking down on that head, you can hear that thing start knocking, you know, cylinder knock, you know. And it's got a knot gauge on there. Whenever it gets to a certain point, you take a reading off your dial indicator on your cylinder head, all that. You look in a book, it's compared to isooctane, which is 100 octane with tetraethyl lead in it, and you get a reading as to what that fuel knocks at. Okay, that's how they get it. So you can see the motor octane machine puts a lot more stress on the fuel. That's the reason a motor number is always a lower number, because it stresses the fuel out more. Well, what do you mean? Well, look, right here, intake temperature. That's a big deal, right? Another big deal is the timing. Is it twice the amount of timing as the research machine? So the motor number, this is the number that you should really look at. I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen a race engine that you run around the track and you half throttle. You're always wide open, right? Okay. The research machine is designed to simulate a car cruising down the highway, okay? This is for ASTM purposes is what all this is for. In the way at the gas pump, when you see R plus M over 2, the gas pump, R plus M slash 2, right? That's these two numbers added together and divided by 2. That's what that means at the gas pump. But if you look at almost all of our, what we consider our upper end real racing fuels, we only use the motor octane number. Why do we do that? Because it's more, it means more to you guys, the racer, than the research number. The research number doesn't really mean that much to you guys, but the motor octane number does. And that's the way that the machines are ran, and that's the numbers and all that. And that's why the motor number will always be a lower number. Research number will always be higher than that because it's simulating car cruising down the highway. And then your R plus M over 2 is just what you see at the gas pumps. Anytime you're comparing fuels and somebody tells you that you're buying a 116 octane fuel you should always say, well, is that a motor number or a research number? And if they don't know, then you're kind of in trouble. But if they say, most of our competitors, though, use an R plus M number or a full research number. Why? Because it's a higher number. To the guy who don't know any different, the only thing that he's saying is well, hell, you know, this company over here has 116 octane for less money than what you have 110 for. Like, well, yeah, but it's not the same. You got to look at the numbers and compare them. You know, you got to make sure you're comparing motor number to motor number, you know, or research to research, or R plus M to R plus M over, you know, 2, you know. So that's the octane. That's where it comes from. Okay? Does that make any sense to you guys? Make more sense to you? So just look at any of our competitors' brochures. Just look at them and see what number they're throwing out there. Most of the time it'll be an R plus M over 2 number because it's higher, or even higher still, it'll be a research number. So anyway, that's just kind of a little lesson on octane numbers and where they come from and how they come about. Now another thing, another big thing in the racing world is oxygen-bearing compounds. Do you guys know what that means by chance? Well, most racing fuel, okay, doesn't have any oxygen-bearing compounds in it. And oxygen-bearing compounds are chemicals that carry an oxygen molecule in their makeup. To give you an example, like that.
Yep, let me, you got the releaser.
Methanol. This is an oxygen-bearing compound. In its chemical makeup, what is this? MEOH, I think it is.
Mhm.
Right? MEOH?
Yep.
Nitromethane, CH3NO2, right? It carries an oxygen molecule with it. And MTBE, which is the most popular one for what we do, racing fuel. They all use is called MTBE, which is an ether compound. It carries an oxygen molecule with it. Okay, and basically what it does is it allows more oxygen to go in the motor in a chemical form, which allows that motor to do what? You can richen it up a little bit. When you richen it up, you burn more fuel. When you burn more fuel, what do? You create more energy, right? So that's what you're doing. That's all that it means. And so if you're using like a straight, say 110, and your rules say that you can use whatever you want, why in the world wouldn't you put 113 in it? 113 is oxygenated, okay? So what does that mean if you put it in there? It means that you may have to, depending on how rich you are now, because most people run rich because they don't know how to tune, okay? Right? Most people do. So it will lean the motor down a little bit because it's dragging some oxygen in with it, into the combustion chamber with it, okay? So why on earth wouldn't you run an oxygen-bearing fuel when you're allowed to? Be worth 10 horsepower to you. You know, put it in there and run it. Then we have some other, like guys that run these crate engines and things like that. We have a fuel called CHP. CHP stands for crate horsepower. It's loaded with oxygen-bearing compounds, guys. You know, on one of those engines, it's 20 horsepower, 25 horsepower. Put it on a dyno, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Put it on the track. So that's all that oxygen-bearing fuels means. It's got some oxygen in the chemical makeup of the liquid, which allows it to drag it into the combustion chamber, which allows it to burn more fuel, which creates more energy. That's all that it means. And you can get some good power out of it. I've had, I don't know how many people say, there's no power in gasoline. Let's go to the dyno. You know, I'll prove you wrong on that deal.
Same motor, different fuel, different numbers.
Do what?
Same motor, different fuel, different numbers.
Same motor, different fuel, different numbers, yes. Yeah, typically speaking, we do baselines, you'll baseline on whatever fuel. And have you guys been around dynos much? You set it up, you do your baseline, and then you switch your different fuels over, then you retune for them and get them going, right? And for whatever reason, in the dirt track world, they don't pay that much attention to that stuff. But they can tell you everything there is to know about their pistons, their valve springs, all that stuff. But then they go down and they put the cheapest oil they can get in it and the cheapest fuel that they can stick in it.
Proud of their $40,000 motor and proud of their $20 in oil and fuel.
I see it all the time. And another big thing is methanol. Okay? Here's, as soon as it starts warming up, especially in this area here, northern Texas and all that, you're going to see a flood on the market of cheap methanol. And it'll be sold around the $95 a drum, $100 a drum range, something like that. And a lot of dirt track guys, they're just in heaven because they can get cheap methanol. Well, that methanol is reclaimed methanol. They've used it in another industrial process before. Okay? I've seen that stuff with hydrocarbons in it, with everything in the world in it. And the motors are lazy on it typically. They're not very crisp on it. And I've also seen it kill motors before. Lean them out. Kill them. So, I actually get those phone calls quite a bit. And the typical conversation kind of goes like this. A guy calls me up. He's wanting a price of methanol. Okay, and I'll give him a price of our M1 methanol. And then he'll tell me his story. And his story is typically, he's already replaced his spark plugs, his ignition wires, he's replaced his MSD, if that's what he's running. Anyway, his ignition source, put it that way. He has replaced his carburetor or swapped it out. The last thing that he thinks about is his fuel, is the methanol. He don't think it could be bad for whatever reason, because it sounds on the track just like, a high-speed miss. When you get up in your upper end, or you're at the straightaway, the upper end of the RPMs, the thing's popping and banging and acting kind of weird. Sounds just like an ignition problem or something. Well, whenever they're calling me, they've already spent $2,000 replacing all this stuff, when that should have been the first thing that they went, especially if you're running methanol, and especially if you're not buying a methanol that you know is good, if you're buying an industrial source methanol. So I would say to you guys, so what if it costs another $80 a drum? Spend the money. Because you never know what you're getting with that other stuff. Whereas if you get it from us, we get it in dedicated tankers, directly from the manufacturer. We test it for hydrocarbon, odor, visual, gravity. If it fails any of those, we reject the whole load. It's gone. And then it's immediately drummed into line drums. So, methanol is a biggie in the dirt track world. And I actually worked for a guy one time. He got his methanol from an industrial source. They came over and they squirted 10 drums for him out at the dirt track. This is in Abilene, Texas, at the Speedway in Abilene, Texas. This was years ago, by the way, not anytime soon. 6 different engines that we built took a crap that weekend. He had to warranty every one of them. You know what was in the methanol? Dry cleaning solution was in the methanol, because that tanker that had came over and filled those drums up, what did it have in it right before it? Dry cleaning solution. And they didn't steam it, empty it. And see, that's you gotta watch it. Methanol likes a lot of different chemicals, especially water. It absorbs water. Take it right out of the air. And you don't know it. You can't see by looking at it.
Sitting in your plastic fuel jugs over the winter could the first of the year, you have, like you said, that little mist, it's what all it is moisture in that fuel.
You bet it is. The motor's lazy, it's not crisp, right?
Mhm.
You know, everything, yeah. Yeah, that's right. And you can't tell it. The only way you can tell is you take it, send it to a lab. Well, you're not gonna do that, you know? So you just gotta get you some fresh methanol. But, another thing that I get a lot of times from dirt track guys are, they call me wanting to buy nitromethane to put in their gas or to put in their methanol, okay? In gasoline, you can mix it in gasoline and it'll mix up to a certain percentage. Then after that, it wants to separate and fall out, okay? It won't hold it in suspension. Now, it's different on all the different fuels because of the different chemicals in the different fuels. But one of the problems that we see is some guys, they'll get hold of some nitromethane somewhere, they'll put it in there at a 10% ratio with gasoline. Nitromethane's heavy, so what does it do? It separates, it falls to the bottom of the fuel cell. So what happens when they turn their fuel pump on? They get a straight shot of nitromethane into their engine. You know, and they end up killing their motor. You know, seen it quite a few times. And then these guys who want to mix it with methanol, it will mix with methanol in any percentage and stay mixed. Okay, it's not going to separate. It's not going to fall out. Will it make power? Yes, it'll make power. Will it lean the motor out? Yes, it'll lean the motor out. So for methanol, the only kind of power additive that you really want to use is nitromethane. But most tracks will throw you out if they know that you're running nitromethane. Some tracks don't care. You know, they don't check nothing. It's just kind of like run what you've run.
81 will toss you out for that, won't they?
If they test for it.
Well,
They
yeah,
do once in a while.
that's the key on that. I don't know, but I'm
So-
gonna take that chance. and
No,
turn up the
really and
motor.
truly, I would leave it alone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even fool with it.
What
But
would, on the methanol, what's the difference between the M1 and the M5?
the M5 has a hydrocarbon in it. It has a chemical in it that allows the methanol to burn, ignite faster, burn more complete when it burns.
So for our purpose in a modified, use the M1?
If there's any kind of fuel test you got to go through, use the M1.
Okay.
Okay, don't use the M3 or the M5. Use the M1. And that's the big thing. You guys got to watch what your fuel rules say. You know, and all that. So, you guys got any questions about anything that I might get an answer for you? If I can, I'd be happy to. If I can't, well, we have an in-house chemist that I'm sure can.
That seemed pretty simple and straightforward to me, actually.
Yeah.
Just knowing what the numbers mean and the difference between that is a big thing. And you know, certainly sit down and do some research and try to figure out, you know, who's running what and what they're bringing into the racetrack and versus what we can get here.
Mm-hmm.
So make an informed decision that way instead of just buying it because it's there.
We'll see a definite performance advantage on sealed fuel versus true.
What's
fuel.
out there.
Yeah, what Chris is saying is exactly right. And we don't like fuel that's been setting in a tank, okay, like at a racetrack or something, because those tanks are vented to the atmosphere, right? They have to be, because they're not pressure vessels. They're just regular old thin walled, like farm type tanks, okay? So what happens in the heat of the summer when I open this up and you can see the wavies coming out of it? You know, what you're seeing come out of this fuel is what we call the light ends. It's the volatile products that are in the fuel, the stuff that makes the burning speed faster, okay? And those tanks that sit out in the sun like that, those light ends, whenever, I don't know if y'all ever noticed or not, but have you ever noticed whenever a racetrack gets a fresh load of fuel, the cars run real good? And then after it sets for towards the end of the month, especially during the summertime, everybody's car kind of is heating up. You're starting to have some heating problems and sluggish cars, especially during the middle of the race, like the cars will run real good at first, and all of a sudden they start kind of running right, kind of being mushy and all that. Well, it's a function of that. So it's important to keep, especially racing fuels, in something sealed up, especially metal, not these things. These things are good to put it in, they're good to,
They're used for transportation, quickies.
that's it. They're just a rapid refill device is all they are, okay? They're not a storage container at all. But believe it or not, this stuff is kind of porous. It'll allow stuff to escape. Most people don't realize it. Something else people don't realize, even on a drum, a big drum, if you set one of those drums outside in the summer, and here comes a rain shower, and it cools that drum real quick, and the water's sitting on top of that drum. That drum will cause such a suction, it will pull water through the seal, and water will go inside that drum. And if you don't believe me that they'll pull a suction, go right back here and look at his 5-gallon cans right now. He's got some triangle-shaped 5-gallon cans back there, and that's simply due to temperature changes. And the more, I guess, the higher the RVP of the product, which is re-vapor pressure, the more problems we have with that. We have some motorcycle fuels. One of them's called MR12. It will literally turn one of these cans into a triangle because it sucks in so hard.
So when you see that, do you not want to buy that?
Oh no, it's fine. The material inside's fine. As a matter of fact, it means that it's got a good seal on it.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing wrong with the material inside of it. It just looks bad. Looks ugly. So you always want to keep racing fuel in a metal container, sealed up. In a
Constant temperature.
cooler the better, right?
And some shelter.
Absolutely. The worst thing you can do, and I see it all the time, is guys going down the road with these things in the back of their pickup all week long with racing fuel in it. And they're going to race Saturday night. It's the worst thing that you can do to it. Another thing, these things will let UV light penetrate, ultraviolet light from the sun.
Great fuel.
Yeah. And any leaded racing fuel, it will oxidize the tetraethyl lead that's in there. It'll turn it to a whitish powder, and then it'll settle out. It'll settle to the bottom of the jug. And basically what you have is just an unleaded product when that happens. You'll never get that lead back in suspension. It's done for. It's gone. And I see that all the time. People run around with these things in the back of their trucks.
Now, is it okay to, on race day, you got your barrel at the house, you fill up what you need in those, take them to the racetrack and use them at the racetrack? I mean, because you're talking about a relatively...
But keep them in the sun. I keep them out of the sun.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm
keep
saying.
them in the trailer, throw something over it, or whatever. Just keep it out of direct sunlight. And the darker, the better for the UV light. The white ones are the worst as far as penetration goes.
We have black ones here for that reason.
There you go. But metal is what you need to keep it in. Keep it sealed up good and tight.
But one of the things you're touching on and touching around there a little bit is, one of the things I tell the guys, especially with the fuels like Late Model Plus and CHP, is you wait till the last minute to put the fuel in the car, wait till the last minute to put it in the jugs, so you have as little time exposed outside that drum as you can. Same thing with methanol. You put it in those, you put it in your car, it's open to the air, it's getting moisture from that point forward. So you want to protect that to the very last minute. You don't want to fill your car up on Tuesday and have it ready to go to races and put it in the trailer.
No, you don't.
Yeah, because that vent valve in the fuel is no different than the fuel tank at the track.
Right.
Yeah, it's all that's, bad news. And especially whenever you get into like some of the horsepower making fuels like the CHP, something that's important with the CHP is, especially in the summertime, you need to have a good fuel pump on the motor, not stock fuel pump or something, but a good one, an aftermarket good pump. And you also need to have a return off the carburetor going back to the tank. Why? Because you're out in a 50-lap race, somebody spins out, you're idling around out there, that fuel's heating up and it'll start to boil in the carburetor. But as long as you got the return line going back where that stuff's constantly circulating with a good pump on it, you'll be fine.
Belt drive pump?
Yeah, just any kind of a good pump. You can't believe what we get calls, people running stock pumps and, stuff like that. But you just need to have a good pump on it.
Well, like,
So you touched on something else just then, the temperature of the fuel. You want to keep it away from the heat, no matter what it is. So, I see a lot of people put them right up, the fuel line right up against the header.
Oh, yeah, that's a
You need to
huge
insulate
mistake.
it, yeah.
Burn the fuel before it gets there.
It just heats the fuel prematurely, which is degrading the quality.
Oh, absolutely. Some of these fuels that we have for the motorcycle, like Supercross, motocross, AMA Supercross, motocross stuff, called MR12, MR Pro 6, stuff like that. These fuels make, in those new four-stroke dirt bikes, man, they make power, good power. And they need it for the whole shot. That's what they need it for, because in that world, the whole shot is everything, right? It's hard to pass 40 other guys on dirt bikes, unless you're super good. Well, these fuels that I'm talking about, MR12, Pro 6 and such, they have that same issue with boiling. And the bikes wanting to vapor lock and stuff. So the dirt bike world came out to run these fuels with insulation that goes underneath the tanks now. So as soon as you buy one, you jerk the tank off, and there's a couple of companies that make these insulating kits that stick to the bottom of those tanks to protect the fuel, the heat off the motor from going, cooking that fuel, getting it hot, So they figured out what to do to make it work through the whole race. And so has a lot of the guys that run the CHP, and especially at your higher altitudes and real hot days and stuff. You got to insulate things, keep it cool, all that. So
Who's running gas versus methanol? Gas? Because that's going to be the piece that will be most interesting here.
here's something that's pretty cool, guys. All you fellows that have any kind of small gas engines, weed eaters, lawnmowers, or whatever, the ethanol stuff is just killing that equipment. You let it set for a month, chances are it won't start, because the ethanol is just a horrible chemical. But there are products out there that you can add to your gas that will just prolong the agony, okay? But really and truly, until you get the ethanol out of there completely, you're always going to have that problem with it.
And your small engine fuels do that?
Yeah, it doesn't have any ethanol in it, nothing. You don't have to worry about it. You can put it in there, and, a year later, that thing should fire right up easy.
I've seen a lot of advertising for that on Nav TV with that extreme must-see racing series, I guess. They even have cars sponsored by VP where one of the numbers on them is 50 to 1. That's the car number. So I don't know, but I've seen and heard of them before. So.
Did you already talk about the late model plus and the CHPs and the 110s and C12s and stuff?
Well, briefly, kind of in the octane type.
Okay.
When I was talking about octane, but
If you don't mind, start with kind of the basic, first level VP fuel, and kind of go up through what they would be for the dirt type environment.
okay, like the basic fuel out there is just regular old 110. That's what you see the most of at these dirt tracks, just 110. It's a non-oxygenated fuel designed generic to cover a wide range of applications. We make it, our competitors make a 110. They're good for compression ratios up to, depending on how hot it is and all that. There's a lot of variables there, but typically speaking around 12 and a half, 13 to 1, something like that. Most of it has about 4 grams of lead in it per gallon. That's kind of the generic base entry level fuel. Now off of that, the guys that wanna make power, make all the power they can make. Well, there's a lot of options out there. You can go to like, the 113 would be the next step up, that's oxygen bearing compound. It's got some oxygen in it, okay? And then the next step up from that would be something like the CHP, which has even more oxygen bearing compounds in it. You have to make sure that your fuel rules will allow running oxygen bearing compounds. But if you're just using regular 110 or any fuel that has no oxygen in it, when you can run an oxygen bearing fuel, you're leaving power on the table. No two ways about it.
Well, what about like for, not that I'm in Hornets anymore, but I run with guys that are. I'm sitting here looking at the chart, the extreme unleaded, the 110 and unleaded extreme is, I guess, what we would be running, but it's not oxygenated. Those Hornet motors have to have unleaded fuel. Is there another unleaded fuel that you would recommend that is oxygenated?
Yeah, 109.
In replace of that?
Yeah,
Where,
109.
where is that
It's
at?
called MS 109 on there.
It's the next column over.
Yeah, it's loaded with oxygen bearing compounds. It's got a good octane in it and everything.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I don't know that everybody understands, what oxygenation in the fuel does
Oh, there it is, okay.
to the blend of the fuel mixture or the jetting of it,
Well,
etc.
anytime that you introduce, like I was talking about earlier, an oxygen bearing fuel, when you haven't been running one, like let's say for instance, if you go from 110 to 113, you can expect that motor to lean out. It's going to lean it down. So most people run kind of rich anyway. You may be able just to get away with putting it in and not having to do anything. But for the guys who know what they're doing and they tune well to atmospheric conditions every now they're at the racetrack, you're definitely probably going to have to throw a couple of jet sizes in it to fatten it up. Otherwise you'll be too lean. So any of those with any percent oxygen, you can expect to have to richen it up some. Because it's dragging oxygen in with it, with the fuel. So I've heard people compare it to nitrous oxide. No, it's nothing like nitrous oxide. But it is giving your motor more oxygen. So, you know, if you run like one of these little, if you're limited to like a 500 CFM carburetor or something, right? And you're typically run, you know, 110 or C12, something like that. Well, if you go to one of these oxygen bearing fuels, one that's got a lot of it in there, you'll have to richen that thing up quite a bit. But you'll be allowed to, your motor will burn more fuel at that point, which creates more energy, which creates more power. So
12-to-1 compression ratio. C85 compared to methanol.
C85 compared to methanol, I would run methanol. That's what I would
2 or
run.
3% difference in power.
Ethanol is just a horrible chemical all the way around. I would run, if you're just stuck on running E85 type product, we have one that's called C85.
That's what I said. C85 compared to methanol.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The C85 is designed completely different compared to what you find at Walmart or wherever that has it at the pump, okay? There, you're liable to get it 60%, 66% one time. The next time you get it, it may be, 80%. It's never the same. There's a huge, wide range that they make that stuff with. And as long as it falls in there somewhere, they're going to call it E85, okay? With our C85, it's made the exact same every time. And we put a couple of chemicals in it to make power, okay? So it's not the same animal. It's completely different. In that respect, I would probably run the C85 if you're allowed to.
I wasn't comparing the ethanol or E85. I was comparing C85
That's what I'm
to
saying.
methanol.
To methanol. If you have that choice, I would probably run the C85. if you can get away with it.
It's better than the M1, you're saying?
Should make more power, yes.
Than the M1.
C85 has more power than M1.
We put chemical in it to make more power,
Okay.
okay?
The gravity test on the lines of E85?
Oh, I'd have to ask the chemist on that one. Because E85 varies so much from the pump. You know what I'm saying? Because it's never the same. There's a wide range there, but ours will be the
Nothing to compare
same.
it to.
Yeah, ours will be the same.
I've heard that, but I know somebody that did check where they were getting it at, local supplier, and he said he couldn't find a lot of difference, but I can see where it would vary.
Oh, it'll vary, yeah. Yeah, it depends on how long it takes them to get rid of the load that they had in there.
He kept going every week checking it.
Mhm, mhm. Now we do. Now, if all things being equal, okay, if you compared the C85 to our M5, okay, I would run the M5. All right. So you gotta compare the right animal.
Sure.
So.
No, but our track has additive rules that
Yeah,
we can't
yeah.
run the
If you
M5.
if you guys got a water test rule, or a gravity rule, or a nitrogen bearing compound rule, don't run it.
And the C85 would be the same. If
Be the
we've got
same,
fuel
yeah.
rules, we couldn't run it.
Yeah, not ours.
So the M1 at a fuel rule track is probably the best thing for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you so. But, so once again, like on the methanol, just buy your methanol from a good source, not an
Right here.
industrial source. There you go. That's a big thing. Because there's no telling what you're going to get if you don't.
Can you talk to us about the difference between some of the higher end racing fuels like CHP versus late model plus? I mean, where would you use late model plus
Okay.
versus CHP and vice versa? Because
Okay,
I know we
yeah.
get to run crate engines here this year for the first time, and I know that's specifically built for crates, but would late model plus work on a crate engine, or just?
No, I don't think I would typically run it on a crate engine, not the late model plus. I think I'd go to something else. But if you have no fuel rules, okay, and you do have a crate engine, and you want to make all the power you can make, well then go to the CHP. It's loaded with oxygen-bearing compounds. I talked about it just a little bit ago. Make sure you got a good fuel pump on it and a return line coming off the carburetor. Now the late model plus, that is typically used in these real high horsepower engines, bigger cubic inch engines. Late model boys run it. Lots of compression. These long races, and where it really shines is on these long races. And what happens is with some of the older fuels is, let's say you're in Georgia and it's 100 degrees on Saturday night, and you're out there, you're going to run a 100-lap main. That car runs really good for the first 25 laps, but then the motor starts kind of mushing and doesn't run all that good and all that. Well, it has to do with the fuel going into the cylinders. It has to do with I think they call it a heat sink, is what Dwayne was telling me one day. But so the late model plus don't allow that to happen. That motor will run just as good at the end of the race as it does at the beginning of the race in these real high horsepower, high temperature, long races. And that's where it really shines. That's why a lot of those upper end guys run that stuff, because the motor runs the whole race the same. So.
This a real stupid question. What's the difference between a leaded and an unleaded fuel, and can you switch back and forth, or can you
Yeah.
switch from one to the other?
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's just tetraethyl lead. It's a chemical. What it does, it keeps the flame front in control on the top of the piston. Everybody knows what detonation is. You hear it every time you hear your car pinging. That's detonation. And basically, what that is it's detonation. It's the fuel going into the combustion chamber, and then instead of burning evenly across the top of that piston and pushing down on top of that piston, it just detonates. It explodes instantly like that, and it's extremely hard on the motor. Knock the ring lands out of it, break crankshafts, knock the bearings out of it. It just tears stuff up. The only chemical that I know of that will stop that or will keep that flame front in control and still allow it to burn evenly with the top of that piston and push down evenly on top of that piston to get all the energy out of that fuel is tetraethyl lead. It was designed back in the 20s or something for aviation use, and is still used today for that exact purpose. Stop detonation. And there used to be manufacturers of it all over the United States. Now it all comes from overseas. Nobody makes it here anymore on the North American continent.
Do they still put it in aviation gas?
Oh yeah, 1.9 grams of lead per gallon. That's what they use. Sure do. And you'll look at some of our fuels. Some of our fuels may not have but 1/10 of a gram per gallon. Other fuels may have 4 or 5 grams per gallon, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. Like real super high compression, drag engines, for instance, that are running 16.5 to 1 or so, something like that. Well, you can't stick a fuel with 103 or 4 motor octane in there. It'll consume itself. It'll tear that motor all to pieces. So you have to use a fuel that can handle the compression. Another problem we see a lot of times is these street guys. What they'll do is they'll buy a street car, and then next thing you know, they go down, they spend $8,000 or $9,000 on it, putting this a pro charger on it or a turbo system on it or whatever, and then they call up wanting fuel for it. Well, do you still have your O2 sensors on there? Is it computer control? Well, yeah, we do. So you want a leaded fuel to put on that in that car, and it's like, well, I don't really know, And so we're just want to run pump gas, It's like, well, you're not going to be able to just run pump gas. You probably can for just running around a little bit, but if you're really going to punish that thing, you're going to have to get a better fuel in it. And so it's kind of like one thing leads to another, Yeah, that's racing, right? You always find your weak link, put a good motor, good transmission, and the next thing you know, your rear end falls out the back. You always find the weak link.
You fix one weak link to find out. Because of that, you all of a sudden have another one.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, so we still use tetraethyl lead. Aviation industry still uses it. Sure do. Got to. If we didn't know, the racing world would be a lot different than what it is. For sure. Especially whenever it comes to these turbos, blowers, things like that. Now we do have some fuels that you can run in at real high compression stuff that has low octane numbers, but the only way it'll survive is by flooding the cylinder with fuel. If it leans out, it'll kill the motor. It's a group of chemicals that are typically, they make really good power, they smell horrible, they cost a lot of money to get them, but they do make good power.
What was the samples of that fuel? What would be examples of that?
A sample of that would be like the MR12 for dirt bikes.
Right.
Okay. We used to have a fuel years ago called C44. It was one of the most powerful fuels we ever made. Matter of fact, in NHRA Pro Stock and Pro Stock Bike, if you didn't have that fuel, you didn't qualify.
What kind of compressor ratio do they run?
They're running on up there, 15.5, 16 to 1 stuff. But like a bunch of them killed engines with it, because they didn't know how to work it. So they just put it in. Well, come to find out, in order to make it live in the motor, they had to increase their jet size about 3 jet sizes and then back down their timing. 50 horsepower, pouring it in a pro stock, NHRA pro stock. But we don't make it anymore because we can't get one of the chemicals.
But that made them mad.
No, actually, NHRA had made a spec fuel, C25, shortly after what I call the fuel wars, you know, a long time ago. And because we couldn't make that stuff all the time, right? So what was happening is we had some of the bigger pro stock teams that was calling all of our locations and buying it all up. That's what they would do because they didn't want their competitors to have it, because if their competitors had it, you know, they would be on the same playing field as them. So NHRA said, we ain't doing this no more, and made a spec fuel, C25.
Goddamn drag racers.
What are you talking about? Worst cheaters in the world. You know, I honestly think probably the worst cheater in the world is the go-kart guys. I really do. I get those calls all the time. And you know, a lot of times it's the father, it's the dad that calls. You know, his son races a go-kart. Yeah. He's wanting that edge. He's, what do you have, you know?
We still run carts a couple times a year. They don't have any compression. That's why it's a different animal. What fuel are you recommending for it? We've got some 2-cycle stuff and some clone stuff.
Well, the 2-stroke stuff, the 2-cycle stuff, is it the 100cc Yamaha motors?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well,
I think what we had.
well, we got some fuels that work really good in that. One of them is called MRX02. Okay, it'll work great in that 2-stroke stuff. All right. Now for them little clone motors, that's a tough one. The carburetors on those things are terrible. But I know that some of the guys have had some success with the MR12 in those.
Is it
Yeah, it's
listed in there?
Yes, it is. Yeah. But for the 2-stroke stuff, I raced shifter cars for a while, and
Where at?
New Braunfels.
Little bitty track.
A little bit. They just expanded it here about 6 months ago.
We went down here and ran. I gotta think about this. Austin at the airport.
Oh yeah. You going to Lockhart? They're having that deal again at Lockhart, the Texas Lone Star Grand Prix.
No, but what do you know about the one down there at the Austin Formula One track in July?
Oh, okay. It'll be nice and cool in July.
Yeah.
Not.
Need
I used
special
to-
fuel for
I used to
that.
live in Texas. Don't lie to the floor, man. Come on now.
Like 400 entries they're expecting, but I think it's flaky. I don't know if it'll go through.
Well, I tell you, that deal at that Texas, look it up. It's called Texas Lone Star
I'm
Grand.
familiar with it. We
Oh,
got
okay.
friends that ran it. We've never gone. It's
Yeah.
just hot.
Well, no, this thing's in like first week of March or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's turning into a
They
big
moved
deal.
it. It was somewhere else. It's a street race, isn't it?
Yeah, in Lockhart, Texas.
It was somewhere else in another Dallas or something, and they moved it.
Correct.
last
I believe
year,
you're right.
You guys in Denton, I think.
No. There's a track in Denton. We ran there.
But you know, we get asked all the time, especially by our distributors, another new fuel. Are you guys nuts? You know, what are y'all doing? You know, because it's a pain to him. You know, that we have so many fuels. Well, that's kind of what makes us special and keeps us in the forefront. Is that we design fuels around applications. You know. Nobody else does that. All of our competitors, they have 4 or 5 fuels. You know, some of them have as many as 6 or 7 now, to cover everything that races. Well, they're all different. You know, a 125 shifter cart, that's an animal, right? Yeah, right.
Junior Formula One car.
That's what they are. It's an animal. You know, they pulled those motors are this big or $7 grand for them stupid things. You know, it's different from your clone thing, from an NHRA Pro Stock. You know, from an NHRA bike, from the new 4-stroke motorcycles are amazing technology in those things. It truly is amazing. As a matter of fact, they don't like 110 and C12 and stuff like that. We designed fuels around those motors, and that's where the U44, the MR12 comes from, all that, because we design fuels around specific applications to get the most power out of that type of application. And that's where the late model plus came from. That's what we do. You know, whenever somebody calls up and they got an application and they want a new fuel for it, well, we typically go to whoever is the best to do our testing. You know, like for instance, the MRX02 I was just telling you about, right? We went to Mitch Payton, Pro Circuit. He's a good friend of ours. He lets us use all of his stuff, you know, and we'll do the testing. We'll bring the chemicals with us. We'll test it, because it's impossible for us to keep up with all the latest and greatest technology in the racing world. So what do? You go to the best that's in that world and you test with them. So that's the way we do it. Because there's just no way that we could keep up with it any other way, you know. Superbike stuff. The technology that's in some of that stuff is incredible, you know. Just, if it races, we pretty much make a fuel for it, and chances are we make a specialized fuel for it.
That's really been the theme for the day. We heard the same thing this morning from Blake, from Joe Gibbs. You know, they have opportunities to make specialty products, and that's where they evolve into the final products. And the same thing with Hoosier Tire. They do the same thing. They go out and look for the smallest opportunity, and they go make a tire for it, because they know it's just going to make them better in everything else, which is what all three of those companies have in common.
Typically speaking, anybody that wants to make power, we're the go-to guys on fuel. We're the guys that get the phone call. Well, why is that? Well, maybe because you can talk to the guy who started VP in 1974 if you want to. You know, you can talk to him. Like me, I've been there 22 or 23 years, 23 years this year, you know. Most of the guys at VP have been there. We're all racers. You know, I've raced drag cars, shifter carts, motorcycles. You know, we're all racers, you know. And so that's important, you know, that we can kind of talk the lingo. We kind of know what's going on. You know, I used to build engines for a living. One of the other techs, Freddie Terza, who's just fantastic. He was one of the engine builders for, I think it was Childers. And that guy's forgotten more than I'll ever know on engines, you know. So anyway, that's why we're unique. The other companies typically are associated with a refinery, right? Typically they will use the chemicals that refinery produces to make their racing fuel, right? And we get chemical from all over the world to make our racing fuel with, because it works better in this application. You know, so we'll bring it in from Europe, we'll bring it in from Germany or France or wherever we need to get, because that may not be made anywhere else in the world. So that's kind of what makes us unique.
Is your factory in Texas?
Yeah, it's in Elmendorf, San Antonio. That's where everything's made. That's where it's originally started. Started by a guy by the name of Steve Burns. He was racing a Slant 6 Dodge Dart at the drag strip. And he noticed that he got all the power he could get out of it, so he's like, well, what's the next thing? You know, well, fuel, I guess, you know. He's kind of a mad scientist kind of guy, you know. So he started going down to the local refinery there and got with some of the guys, the engineers down there, and started talking to them, reading books, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's truly an American success story. You know, he made it happen by going out to the races as a, you know, 19-year-old kid carrying these 5-gallon cans around at the Winter Nationals, setting them down at the pro stock guys' trailers, begging them to use it. Of course, none of them would, because he was just a smart-mouthed kid, you know. Till finally, one of them finally did use it. And Warren Johnson was one of our first paying customers.
Really?
Sure was. So, And then it just has snowballed over the years from that. And, you know, now we're a pretty big company. We're worldwide. We sell a lot of stuff into Europe, Russia, Bahrain. You know, it's going into South America, all over the North American continent. We're starting to ship stuff into China, believe it or not. Yeah, yeah. So it's truly an American success story.